Welcome, everybody, to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. This is one of a long time, 15-year series of presentations presented by the Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Neill Proctor Library in Oakland, California. Up to 2 years ago, we were physically at the library, but since then we've been running these Zoom sessions, and we should be welcoming people from around the world because we have an audience way beyond Oakland, California. As the name suggests, we're an organization devoted to the advancement of Marxist thought and the struggle of the working class and the peoples of the world for liberation and communism. We welcome different views within that Marxist tradition. We try not to be sectarian. Hopefully we succeed in general. We're not associated with any particular Marxist group, but we welcome them all. Our topic today is a very topical one. It's on the war in the armed struggle in Ukraine, and particularly the question that's being raised is whether that conflict is an imperialist war or not. And our speaker today is Raj Sahai, who is a longtime activist, both in India and in the United States. And as part of that, he's been a leader of the Institute for the Critical Study of Society. So with that, I would like to welcome Raj to speak. He'll speak for about
an hour. Probably close to an hour. I'll try to keep it under.
Okay, I'll keep you to that. And then we'll be followed by a question and answer and discussion. So go ahead, Raj. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard, for the introduction. So I have slides, I think about 18 or 20 slides, and I will not read all of them. I'll read some of it and later on make it available on our website so people who have interest can go over what I have put together here. And it is my point of view, but I think it is also for discussion in our group. So I hope there will be a healthy and very spirited discussion afterwards. So the question is the present Ukraine-Russia conflict and imperialist war. Russia launched what I would call an invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, although they call it military operation. From 24th of February to 17th of March, that is 3 days back, I got the data from UN, which shows 816 civilians killed and 1333 injured in the Ukrainian part, excluding Luhansk and Donetsk. Now in Luhansk and Donetsk, which is the Donbass collectively called, 222 were killed in the same period and 681 injured, although the population of that is much less. So per capita of population, it's much more killing and wounding happening in that area than in the rest of Ukraine, despite what you see on the television, which is heavy bombing and all the suffering that you show on American television anyway. It is shown just one-sided. Thousands of soldiers of Russia and Ukraine have lost their lives, and there are claims by at least Ukraine, having killed tens of thousands of Russian soldiers, which is suspect. And petrol at the pump station here in California, in our area, in the last 3 weeks has gone more than 20% of what it was before. So this war has an impact, immediate impact on the cost of living. Working classes in the US and Russia, in fact, all around the world will be a lot poorer as a result of the additional inflation and cost of living, which is in the past year in the US, even before the war, was already very high at almost 8%. Now, this war did not start in 2022, but rather in 2014 with the Maidan counter-revolution, aided and encouraged by the US. This led to the Luhansk and Donetsk two areas, with two provinces where the Russian-speaking people are in the majority, declared independence. Russian was actually blocked as the regime that came to power with the coup tried to make Ukrainian the language in their schools, and that's where the struggle started in Luhansk and Donetsk. And then they declared independence. Now, Russia did not recognize them. No country recognized them, but Russians did help them fight with the Ukrainians who attacked them with heavy guns. US sanctions and pressure on its camp of countries, follower countries, to block trade with Russia amounts, in my opinion, to expansion of this war, though it is economic warfare right now, not yet a military one. There's increasing sentiment among the US political elites and the mass media for the US and NATO to openly, militarily fight Russia. Biden so far has resisted it. Nuclear war is a threat looming over the entire humanity. Why is this happening now? I will try to explain it using Lenin's thesis on imperialism and war. So now here's a map of conflict. This is from the Institute with Study of War, Institute for the Study of War in the United States. So the pink areas are occupied with the solid line around. They're under the control.
Raj, can you share your screen?
Oh, it's not shared? I beg your pardon. Hold on. I'm looking at it, but I thought I was sharing. Okay, thank you. Thank you for reminding that. Okay. All right, so now I can go back to the presentation. Okay, I've done this. I was reading from this slide, so I'm going to move to the next one. This is the war map of Ukraine. There's, as of March 16th, that was the last I could get, although there's supposed to be another one, but I couldn't get it out. For some reason, it wouldn't show up. So the pink areas and the solid border around are the areas controlled by Russian forces. The dotted area pink is assessed Russian advances in Ukraine, but not yet under their control. The blue dotted areas with blue dotted supposedly claim Ukrainian counteroffensives, which doesn't show up very much in this map at all. So there might be some very tiny ones, but up to 16, there were counteroffensives, if there were any, were insignificant. And then the round circle with the blue shows observed Ukrainian protest against Russian occupation. And there you see in the southeast, there are some spots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 places, okay? Now, Ukraine before the current war, and I'm not going to read all, but generally, just everybody gets into the same page, geographical size is about 750 miles east-west, which is Lviv to Luhansk axis, and north-south, which is Chernobyl to Odessa axis, 450 miles. Area is 233,000 square miles, which is roughly equal to France, which is 248,000 square miles. Germany, by comparison, is only 138,000 square miles. Population is 42 million. In Ukraine, France is 67, Germany 83 million. Ukraine GDP 2021 is 584 billion, compared to France 3.1 trillion, Germany 4.7 trillion. Ukraine is the 55th largest economy in the world. It is one of the world's largest grain exporters. However, Ukraine remains among the poorest in Europe and most severely corrupt countries in Europe. In 2021, the average nominal salary in Ukraine reached its highest level at $525 per month. But here's more significant: Ukraine's median wealth per adult was $40, one of the lowest in the world. Now, this is an industrialized country with a grain-producing, very productive economy. What it indicates is the oligarchy is sucking out everything. And this is not just the oligarchy local, but external oligarchy that comes in there as investors. Okay, Ukraine produces nearly all types of transportation vehicles and spacecraft, large capacity Antonov airplanes, which India buys also from Ukraine, and trucks are produced, exported to many countries. Ukraine has its own space agency. I was quite surprised to find. It became an active participant in scientific space exploration. It has launched 6 self-made satellites and 101 launch vehicles. Before the Russian-Ukrainian war, this present war, Ukraine, the number of tourists visiting Ukraine was 8th largest in Europe. Okay, natural resources of Ukraine are very high, and just read a few. First in Europe in proven recoverable reserves of uranium ores. Second in Europe, 10th in the world in titanium. Second in the world, manganese. Third in the world, iron reserves. Third in the world, second largest iron reserves in the world. Second place in Europe in terms of mercury. Third in Europe in shale gas reserve. 8th in the world in coal reserves. So you can see minerally, it's very rich. And then Ukrainian agriculture is also, look at the ranking. First in Europe in arable land area, first outside of Russia. Second in the world in export of sunflowers. Third in the world by area of black soil, which is what is very productive, right? Third largest producer of potatoes. Fourth, barley. Fifth, rye. Fifth also in corn. Fifth in the world in honey production. Fifth in the world in wheat export. So it's a very significant economy, but look, people's net worth is very low. So this tells you already what's going on there. Okay, Ukraine's industrial ranking also quickly. Second largest in Europe and 7th largest in the world in installed capacity of nuclear power. And the first is, of course, France. Third largest gas production in Europe. Fourth largest gas market in Europe. I guess it was the Russian gas that was going through Ukraine. Third largest iron exporter in the world, and so forth. Clearly, in summary, the resources, the size of Ukraine makes it important to both Russia and the US, also to EU, China, and India, the other large capitalist powers. Okay, now what about Russian Federation, China, and USA? Basic data, just a few. Russian Federation, largest country in the world in area. Russia extends across 11 time zones, population 146 million. GDP 1.7 trillion, although in purchasing power parity, it is 4.3 trillion. So its GDP is less than a tenth of the United States. People's Republic of China is more than half, just slightly more than half the area of Russia. Population is 10 times, 1.45 billion. GDP is 18.5 trillion in US dollars, but in PPP, it's 22.65, which is slightly more than US. which has roughly the area of China, 7.8 million square miles, population 328 million, which is more than twice of Russia. GDP is 22.3 trillion, same in PP, obviously. EU had a GDP of 18.77 trillion. So that's another capitalist association in capitalist countries. India's GDP was 3.05 trillion, according to IMF. In purchasing power parity, India is about probably 5 trillion or thereabouts. Okay, now historically, what is Ukraine? Ukraine and Russian civilization all started in what is present-day Kiev. Kiev is on the Dnieper River, which runs roughly north and south, trade route, and obviously agricultural areas around bring wealth. So that's the basis, and the river is transport. That used to be everywhere. The main source of main waterways were what roughly equivalent to highways today. So both Russia and Ukraine civilization actually start. Before that, Russia had these settlements, but they really didn't have any identity as a Russia, nor did Ukraine. But it starts here, okay, around, just before 1000 AD, okay. 8000 AD, now religion gets into the whole picture too. Pope Leo III, that's obviously the Holy Roman Empire beginning, crowned the Frankish king of Charlemagne as emperor, reviving the title in Western Europe more than 3 centuries after the fall of ancient Western Roman Empire in 476. So this is what is called the Holy Roman Empire. Was based, however, in several countries. It wasn't based in Rome, and finally ended up in Germany in 1806, which was dissolved following the Confederation of Rhine by French Emperor Napoleon, creation of the Confederation. So Voltaire said about this Holy Roman Empire, this body is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. That's what it is. But the Nazi party in Germany in 1920s called it the First Reich. So you see, that's where their grandiose ideas about empire come from. Anyway, 1054 AD, there was the Great Schism, right? Great Schism. Greek Orthodox Church separated from Eastern Roman Catholic Church. About 1000 AD, Kievan Rus founded in area around present-day Kiev, which is the map I showed. Prior to that, tribes lived in both Russia and Ukraine. Poles, Ukrainians, Russians, and Jews lived in settlements with no national consciousness before that, okay? Polish landlords were Roman Catholics, okay? And as were the Lithuanian landlords, peasants and serfs were the Orthodox Christians. So this is the division, also class division, right? Or before pre-capitalist class division. Jews were the overseers of the serfs on behalf of the landlord. So that's why anti-Semitism took a root among peasants and serfs. That's why all over Eastern Europe and Russia, this anti-Semitism, because Jews were used as overseers. They were not allowed to own land. So they got put into that middle position. 1249 AD, Pius IX sent Teutonic warriors, which is German, Swedes, and all those people, to convert or kill the pagan Orthodox Christians of the East in Ukraine and Russia. They raped nuns and killed and plundered Constantinople. This is how religion was. They were trying to suppress the Greek Orthodox. Ukrainians were, so who were the Ukrainians? In 1649, now begins this identity of Ukraine. Cossack chief or headman, Bohdan Khmelnytsky, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce the name properly, entered Kiev, okay, overthrowing Polish and Lithuanian landlord domination of Ukraine. It was welcomed by masses and the Greek Orthodox Church. This is the first urban settlement, right, in that area. Before Moscow wasn't there. Ukrainians were Cossack peasants who probably migrated down. Well, Moscow was there, but it was not, Moscow was already there. Sorry, there was a czar in Moscow, but they're not as strong yet. Ukrainians were Cossack peasants who probably migrated down from the steppes, where Mongolians mixed with locals who were ancient Russians by marriage from prior invasions of Russia. So it's the Mongols who were ruling much of Russia. And that kind of ended around this time, about 1650 or thereabouts. Okay, so then the question is rise of nationalism in Ukraine. In 1654, Cossack chief, the same guy, Khmelnytsky, concluded the Treaty of Pereyaslav with Russian Tsar and called and allied the Cossack kingdom, or what such as it was, with the Tsardom of Russia, thus placing the central Ukraine under direct Russian control. So he ceded that nationalism is not yet a reason, modern nationalism is not a reason yet. So now about the language, Ukrainian, which has been foisted upon the Russian speaking, actually until the 19th century was considered a dialect of Russian language. And Ukraine itself was known as Little Russia, and Ukrainian language was known as Little Russian or dialect of Russian. And then there was a significant intellectual whose name I don't remember, but he's significant. He's the son of a serf who actually started writing about nationalism and attacking the Tsar and so forth, Tsarina and all that. So that gave a boost to national pride in Ukraine and Ukraine identity. So there were four contradictions that emerged in Ukraine. Roman Catholicism versus Orthodox Christianity. That's first. The second was Polish aristocracy, Polish and Lithuanian, versus local peasants and serfs. And nationalists versus old imperialism, starting with the rise of capitalism paved by the French Revolution in 1789 that spread slowly to Eastern Europe and the Russian Tsars. I mean, 19th century is not that slow because 1789 is end of 18th century. So it spreads all over Europe, this idea. Liberty, equality, fraternity were the new values. I've always wondered, I don't know if you guys wondered, what does fraternity mean here? Okay, my thinking is basically they have to redefine what is fraternity. And it was the new nation, a new concept of nation where people were individuals, equal, had liberty. That, that's the French Revolution, that's the positive side. But then there was a romantic notion of a nation state based on these principles, rather than feudal or monarchical state. So this is where nationalism gives birth to nationalism all over Europe, actually. But we're talking in the context of Ukraine. So nation state requires a language, a cultural identity, a productive economy, and a land with borders. These four requirements, as if you've read Stalin's work on that nationalist question, you will see that. It is why the Jews of Europe and Africans and US cannot be a nation. So nationalism, again, nationalism is imposed by governments from above and by the intelligentsia on the common people, horizontally by intelligentsia, because they're not in power. They do it through their intellectual force, intellectual writing, poetry, drama, and all that. So people who identify themselves by religion, caste, ethnicity, or by village from where they come from, as a couple of things from, I went to look at what Communist Party of Russia is saying. They describe the nature of the current Ukrainian state as an alliance of big capital, which is both foreign and some domestic, and the state bureaucracy, mostly foreign, relying on the criminal and fascist elements under the full political and financial control of the United States, that Russian Communist Party. But they also define later on what is Russia. Very similar definition, except it's not under the control of United States. So that's the difference. They describe Russian Communist Party of today, which is the second largest party. By the way, 352 seats in the Russian Duma are United Russia, which is Putin's party. And so there are more than 70 I think more than 75% or near about 75%. 75% is United Russia. And the second largest has 34 or something less than 10%, 9%, which is Russian Communist Party, Communist Party of Russia. Okay, so, and see, they also say hundreds of communists are fighting the Nazis as part of the troops of the People's Republic in Donbass. Dozens of communists have died there. In 8 years, they sent out a lot of convoys with humanitarian aid to these republics and received thousands of children for rest and treatment in Russia, traumatized by this attack from the Ukrainian regime that got installed. So all these years, the Communist Party headed by Gennady Zyuganov demanded from the leadership of Russia the recognition of the independence of Donbass, which Putin didn't do it until he did it in February, okay? So Gennady Zyuganov takes responsibility for pushing for that. Now, I will come to the main theme, which is how does Lenin, and then from there I'll draw some conclusions. So I think I've used up about less than 30 minutes, and I'll try to finish in less than an hour. So first thing is concentration of production. So what are the characteristics when capital reaches the imperialist stage? So concentration of constant capital is more intense than the concentration of variable capital. Those who have read Capital 1, 2, 3 volume, they will understand this right away. That is, the labor power content goes down as machinery increases. So that's concentration of production. And he showed that, this is in early 20th century, large-scale enterprises, less than 1% of all enterprises employed 40% of the workers, but used more than 75% of steam, horsepower, and electricity. In the US, the concentration was even higher. Okay, so then he says, the principal stages of the history of monopolies. Monopoly and oligopoly are the same thing. Monopoly is just one business controlling everything. Oligopoly, from the word oligarchs comes from, is multiple monopolies in different fields. So when people think that when in US mass media says oligarchs in Russia, they don't they're hiding the fact this is oligarchy here. So there's no difference. There's oligarchy in both Russia and here. So in 1860-70 was the apex of development of free competition. According to Lenin, when 1870 is the last time when there was free competition. After the crisis of 1873, long period development of cartels. And crisis of 1900 to 1903, cartels become foundation of economic life. Capitalism turns into imperialism. This is what Lenin's definition is. And here's my take on it. The two world wars reduced the excess capital. And thus, even though monopolies remained in the oligopoly system, small business could grow again. I'm talking about the United States and Europe, and employ workers at better wages. This was also due to the worker militancy inspired by the revolution in the USSR in 1917 and the success of Soviet Union in Second World War and building the economy. That period came to an end by 1973. So 45 to 73 was the golden period of capitalism, where it seemed like it works, because people can get a job, increasing wages and all that, at least in the United States. So now, small business is barely viable. It's artificially propped by the state today. Different, local municipality, state, and federal government try to keep them alive. And my own business was like that, kept alive artificially. Otherwise, I would have been wiped out, okay? In instances where it survives, that's what's happening. And a lot of them go out of business. But the crisis of the workers in small business, petty bourgeois, is apparent now. We all can see it, intensified by COVID epidemic. The US has returned to imperialism sense fully now. So I'm saying there was a dip between 45 due to the war, destruction of capital, etc. Okay, that's my idea. That's not Lenin's. I'm just giving my interpretation. Okay, Lenin's second point was banks, about the banks and their new role. Banks means financial institutions, all of them. So before imperialism, banks basically worked as middlemen in the making of payment. They transform inactive money capital into active capital. This is still under capitalism before monopoly, into capital yielding a profit. They collect all kinds of money revenues and place them at the disposal of the capitalist class. That's what they do. When we deposit our money, it goes in the hands of capitalist class. Then, as banking develops, it is concentrated. Again, concentration taking place in financial institutions. Banks grow from modest middlemen into powerful monopolies, commanding almost all of the money capital in all the capitalists and small businessmen, of all the capitalists and small businessmen, also the larger part of the means of production and sources of raw materials in any one country and a number of countries. This transformation is one of the fundamental processes, according to Lenin, in the growth of capitalism into capitalist imperialism. So I make a comment. The finance capital has enlarged many-fold since 1973 in the US, of course, but also in China, Russia, and India. In 1976 to 1980, when the Bank of America data center in San Francisco and in East Bay, in Concord, of which I was the structural engineer, was designed, that period of 10 years. Bank of America was the largest bank in the world in the 70s by assets controlled, and 5 out of the top 10 largest banks in the world were US banks. Today, 5 of the 11 largest banks in the world are Chinese banks. I said 11. The largest Russian and Indian banks are not even the first 20 largest banks in the world. So Russia cannot be in the list of imperialists by Lenin's definition. That doesn't mean it is not an aggressive capitalist country. That I'm not saying, but it's not at the stage of imperialism. Whereas China apparently is, okay? I think there will be a lot of debate here, but my take is that China qualifies in that. So I have 11 industrial banks, but since you guys can't see it, shall I try to project it here? No, I guess not, Mehmet. Don't try sharing the screen.
Yeah, let's just go on with talking instead of
yeah. So what it is, from the 1st to 10th position is a drop of Bank of America. If you just look at the Bank of America in 45 years, from 76.
I'm sorry, Raj. What we can do is later on we can put your slides on the website and everything. So
I intend to do that. Yeah,
thank you.
We will tell everybody they can see the slides on there. Okay. Today, 5 of the largest banks in the world are Chinese. So that's what I was saying, but I'm showing the figures and all that. Okay, and the largest US bank is about 40% of the assets of the largest Chinese bank today, by the way. Okay, so Lenin's third point, the third slide I have for Lenin is the finance capital and financial oligarchy. You know, Lenin calls it oligarchy, so this applies to the United States first and foremost. An increasing proportion of capital in industry ceases to belong to the industrialists who employ it. They obtain it through the banks, which in relation to them represent the owners of capital. So it's a shift happening from the capital is now much larger, is owned by the capitalist banks, not by the industrialist capitalists. On the other hand, the bank is then forced to sink an increasing share of its funds into industry. So Lenin says finance capital is capital controlled by banks and employed by industrialists. So basically, by now, the power has shifted from industrialists' hands to the banks' hands. So that's why you see most of the powerful people come from where? From the Wall Street, right? Those are financial companies. They're the most powerful. They even have the top government people who control economy are from there. The concentration of production, the monopolies arising therefrom, the merging of the banks within us, such is the history of the rise of finance capital, and such is the content of that concept, according to Lenin. Bourgeois scholars are apologists of imperialism and of finance capital. Instead of revealing the mechanics of the formation of an oligarchy, its methods, the size of its revenues, the connection with parliament, etc., they obscure them. They appeal to the sense of responsibility of bank directors by praising the sense of duty of government officials. And we have seen this. This is what was going on from 2008, right in the open. Give serious study to the petty details of ridiculous parliamentary bills, like they were passed, the Democrats passed that bill, or the supervision and regulation of monopolies. Also, supervision and regulation is in quotes, according to Lenin. So my comment on the financial oligarchy is the highest in the US, but is also significant in India, China, and Russia. In Russia and China, the state controls these, and individual financial capitalists do not have the power they do in the US and India today. It is true, but capitalism cannot be used as a tool, as was asserted by Stephen Gowans here in our, when he was talking about the pandemic. Chinese Communist Party is part of the capitalist system. Okay, this is my assertion, and it is highest ranking members gain from capitalism enormously. How do? They do it legally by the getting shares at the low prices when a firm is formed, and then provided with means to grow, enriching themselves enormously in the process. So it's all legal. It's not illegal. What Xi Jinping is doing is taking out the illegal collections, all kinds of other illegal things, but legal is going on, right? Even in the US, monopolies were broken when they got too large. And so if that happens in China, it doesn't mean socialism. China follows and has to follow the iron laws of capital. The iron laws term comes from, not from me, but from somebody else, Rosa Luxemburg, actually. So Ukrainian state, I told you what Zhuganov says of Communist Party of Russia, already decides an alliance of big capital and the state bureaucracy. Big capital is mostly foreign, but some local too, which came from, the communist officials in Ukraine grabbing the state assets in Ukraine. That's where the oligarchs developed. Okay, but they're relying on fascist elements under the political and financial control of the USA. So that's the state nature. Now, what is the class character of Russia? CPRF, okay, Communist Party of Russia says it's oligarchic bureaucratic power, not much different from the power in Ukraine, except without fascism and full US control. Now, that's an important distinction, but he says it's the same nature. It's not socialist. However, in those rare cases, or even not just very liberal kind of society in which everybody's provided for, but capitalism makes it. No, they don't. Russia is not like that. Okay, so but he says in his argument is like that, Communist Party of Russia. However, in those cases when the leaders of Russia, that means leader of this oligarchic system, oligarchic bureaucratic system, defend the historical interest of the country, its people, CPRF supports it. So that's their defense of saying Russian intervention, as they call it, military intervention is justified. That's how they justify it. And Communist Party of Russia saying sanctions will have, the American sanctions on Russia will have a beneficial effect on getting rid of Russia's imposed dependence on the West in various areas of life. The Russian government is already taking first steps in this direction. The task of the left forces is to vigorously encourage the authorities to change not only foreign policy, but also the socio-economic policy, which doesn't correspond to the interest of. This is an argument like Communist Party of India did when Nehru government came. So it's very similar to that. They didn't succeed, nor will these people, but I'm just giving the position of them. Now, 41 communist parties in the world have opposed the war in Ukraine, but they mostly blame the West. You can see it on ML Today. The one criticism was the decision of the Russian Federation to initially recognize the independence of the so-called People's Republics in Donbass and then proceed to Russian military intervention, which is taking place under the pretext of Russia's self-defense, within quotes, the demilitarization, within quotes, and denazification, within quotes, of Ukraine was not made to protect the people of the region or peace, but to promote the interests of Russian monopolies in Ukrainian territory. So this ML Today's statement of 41 communist parties is is saying this. This is a criticism of Russian military action. So they're saying they're in fierce competition with Western monopolies, and that's what this dogfight is about. So it says we express our solidarity with the communists of the peoples of Russia and Ukraine. And so they basically are criticizing the Luhansk and this thing as not a genuine people's thing, but is a part of Russian elites trying to grab resources. But the rest of the other 6 points here, you could read it, is severe criticism of United States. United States control NATO, and EU is not controlled by the United States, but largely these countries cannot do anything other than what the boss tells them. That's the United States. Okay, so there's a whole list of countries, but missing in that list are Communist Party of Russia, obviously, Communist Party of China, Communist Party of India, the CPI, the Communist Party of India Marxist, which is the largest, and Communist Parties, CPI-ML, okay? CPI-ML and CPI-M and CPI-ML have a little difference. CPI-ML, which is Liberation Wing, they have many CPI-ML, but Liberation Wing, they actually call it an aggression, military aggression of Ukraine by Russia. CPI-M doesn't do that. They basically say that it is unfortunate and that kind of thing, and there should be immediate cessation of armed hostilities and establishment of peace. So they both stand for peace. They both think the working people will be hurt by the war, so forth. But CPI-ML, which is smaller, whose speaker actually spoke in our forum about a year ago on Lenin's birth anniversary. So now I come to the conclusion, and then we can go to discussion, and I think I'm doing well with time. So first is capitalism once again has reached the stage of imperialism on a global scale by the first decade of the 21st century, the stage from where it had receded by 1945 in its economic success due to the two world wars. So that's my comment. War in Ukraine is an imperialist war of rival camps. Workers everywhere are hurt by it. They're going to lose it. They're going to become poorer. They have to fight. The US camp of imperialists instigated the war. By 2014 coup, they encouraged and assisted it. The rival camp of imperialists in China and Russia and few others are challenging US camp's hegemony. So once again, is Lenin's concept versus Kautsky. Lenin, in my opinion, was right. You cannot have single pole of capital. That's what's happened. But the other pole is China, not Russia, in my opinion. By accepting Ukraine's admission in NATO in principle and then aiding it with arms and advisors, the US camp of capitalists have allowed repression of Russian-speaking Donbass population. I think that's genuine. Forcing Russia to intervene. I mean, the timing is forcing. So I don't agree with this ML Today thing. That was an excuse. But lurking behind this is both camps are the strategic and mineral resources and manpower resources of Ukraine. It's a dogfight over it. So the nationalist regime brought to power and held there by right-wing muscle of hyper-nationalist forces, Zelensky being a Jew, hides this reality and allows Israel to remain in US camp. India is trying to balance these two camps. India imports 85% of its crude oil consumption, of which only 2% came from Russia. Now Russia has offered to sell to India on 20% discount of world oil prices and include shipping and insurance in the price. So it's a very substantial discount. Oil trade is not part of US sanctions. And you know why? That's because US's own need to import it, and they're going to import it from Venezuela if they can make the deal, and they probably will make the deal. Rupee ruble will be the basis of this trade with Russia now on this oil, which they have done before. In the Soviet time, that's what they used to do. It's not new for India. 1/3 of food grains to the world are from Russia and Ukraine. So this war is going to make tremendous misery for a lot of poor people around the world. But India now, Indian capital, I think India could now export wheat in large quantity, grains. So there's an opportunity for Indian capitalist class. Russia is promoting yuan as the basis of trade. And I think you have already read that Saudi Arabia is set to do this, sell oil in yuan. At least so far, that's their decision, unless they get beaten back by the United States. So Ukraine's war is likely to undermine dollar as the reference currency over time, and probably US hegemony as well. And with that, I conclude my presentation. We can open up for questions. Thank you very much, Richard and everybody, for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you, Raj. Before we go into question and answers, we're going to have some brief announcements. Jean, would you like to talk about future programs? Incidentally, before we go into that, we've been having, as you know, we've been having some technical problems. So that's why the chat has been disabled. I can't send chats, and many of you others. Hopefully that's cleared up. And there may be some other problems that will show up. But in the meantime, we'll go on as best we can. I don't see Jean opening up. So I just want to remind you that we're accepting financial contributions which help finance our work and also finance the Niebuhr Proctor Marxist Library in Oakland. And I'm going to place sometime today in the chat some information on how you can contribute. But if that is not available, please go to the our website, ICSSmarx.org, and press the donate button, and you'll see details on how to contribute, or look in the email announcement. There's some information there. Okay, so we'll go into a question. Yeah.
Eugene is available now.
Okay, go ahead, Gene.
Yeah, I don't think you don't have my video, but I do have a mute. I'm unmuted. So
go ahead.
Next week, we're going to continue this discussion with more participants, and I think a number of us on the program committee will be speaking, but we don't have a write-up for that, but it'll be equally interesting and controversial. And then the other speakers, we have Judy Greenspan of the Workers' World Party, and another fellow, I don't have the write-up for him. And so I'll do mostly working because my video, and we have workmen taking over the house today. So I will play a lesser role than usual, thank you. But go ahead and proceed, and I can listen at least.
Okay. Yeah, it appears that
Richard, may I say something? Is that because there are so many attacks to the session, we are going to be calling people by their name, and I will allow them to unmute themselves so that they can ask questions, and then I will be muting them again. So please, if you want to ask questions or make comments, please use your reactions button to raise your hands, and Richard will recognize you, and I will be then asking you to unmute yourselves. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mehmet. The first questioner is Norma Harrison. Please, and you're unmuted.
Yes, I see that. I had to lose my page that I had written my notes to myself since the chat isn't here. Has everybody seen the cartoonish representation of US bases adjacent Russia with the question underneath it saying, why did Russia put itself right next to all the US bases? As though it's an aggressive behavior by Russia instead of exactly the opposite. the fellow that does that, he sent it around. His last name is Oakes, OCHS, and he does the committees of correspondence list. So China, all those investments that are going on and the profits going to the profiteers in China. China is supporting an effort to build a communist state. That's what much of the profit is going for. And Xi has been working to make that even more the case, taking more control of the profiteering in China. And you keep reciting rules, although it's difficult for me to understand you, Raj, with your accent and your style of dropping ends of words. I'm not sure that I got full information from you, but you asked for nations in struggle for communism to follow certain rules, and which I've objected to frequently, and I object to it again here. There are no rules to develop justice. You take your whatever road you can and try like crazy to make it work. And China seems to have had, I won't call it so much success as that it's proceeded along the path that it's set itself to let the people provide for themselves, for all of them, in extremely notable amounts and manners. So when you talk about it, the profiteering in China and that it's capitalist, you deny all the effort it's making to build and succeeding at, actually, little by little.
Okay.
You deny that that's being done, and I'm saying it's being done.
Okay. Well,
I'll just make a
Ron,
brief comment on.
go ahead.
We just differ in our view,
Yeah.
but since you said they are making big efforts to build socialism and any path is okay, but there are billionaires in China and there are people working 12 hours a day, sleeping on bunk beds. To me, it's a misunderstanding of Marx that you have to be absolute poverty in order to not have socialism. As soon as you come out of absolute poverty, you have socialism. That is not the case. So Chinese state is a different kind of capitalism. They're a different model of capitalism. That's all I will say. And the life of many people have improved in India under capitalism there, just like here. So why couldn't it improve in China in material sense? But it's the weakening of the working class as power against the capitalists, which you can see even in the last 50 years, I could see how this has happened. That's what Marx's critique is, not about absolute poverty. Anyway, next person. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Trahan, followed by Richard Rai, W, and Mehmet Bayram. Go ahead, Trajan.
When I was in Ukraine, I went to a museum, but I also knew about it. When the Germans invaded during World War II, Ukraine has one of the largest black soil regions in the world, and it's up to 3, 4, 5 feet deep, black earth. The Germans were trucking it back to Germany during the war because it was so rich. And and I visited the farm where the family was from, and I was always told that there were no stones around. And sure enough, I looked around, it was all black earth. I never saw a stone in that whole area. That's how rich that area is. In fact, Ukraine recently has been selling land, leasing land to Saudi Arabia and other countries. You know, it's for sale. The whole country's for sale. And another thing I want to bring up was during the Orange Revolution, the first revolution, there was resistance to U.S. and NATO. I remember reading an article. U.S. ships were going to dock in the Black Sea or in Ukraine. I don't know if it was Odessa or Crimea. There were big demonstrations there, and the U.S. ship had to turn around and leave. So there was a lot of resistance to U.S. imperialism at that time. But I'm just shocked how the Nazis have become in power when the Nazis created so much death there during World War II. But again, a lot of these people are young people. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, the void was left open and poverty was in, and all these young people just gravitated to Nazism and also being pushed by U.S. imperialism. That's my comment.
Thank you. Next speaker is Richard W.
Yay, I'm unmuted. A couple of observations. First off, one of the things I think you kind of overlooked, and I think it's important, and I'm sort of following up on what Trahan was just talking about, is that it's the eastern Ukraine is really where all the mineral wealth is, along with agricultural wealth. The western part of Ukraine is primarily just is agriculture. So I think that the objective of Putin is basically to go toward Kiev and basically stop at the Dnieper River down, form a line down to Odessa to maintain, to close off the ocean, the bay to Ukraine. The second thing I had was I think you fall into a trap here, and that is that and you're not alone at this by certain any means, and that is that we keep looking at things in terms of national power, if you will. And I think that was the environment in which Marx certainly and certainly Lenin were writing in. I believe we've gone beyond that. So now we really have to look at things in terms of international capital, so that what you're seeing now is a formation of a solidification of the international bifurcation of international. If you want to put it in terms, working class versus capitalist class. I mean, that's really sort of what the demarcation is here that's forming up. By focusing on nationalism, I think you do away with the international capital, the international character of capital. It's really about NATO is really about the U.S., the France, the England. It's really about selling weapons and putting pressure on an alternative system to that. So that was one of the things I took a little umbrage with. The other thing is that I think one of the things that hasn't been brought up is in the long run is the formation of a challenge to the Bretton Woods system. And it looks like, it's China, Russia. I would include Iran in this because I think they're a member in this little triangle. But you have a whole host of countries in which both Russia and China are pressuring, and if they in fact form a challenge to the Bretton Woods system, you're going to see. I think there's like about 30 countries that are involved in the Belt and Road Initiative, and a large number of them are lining up with China. They're either abstaining in the United Nations or they're voting with Russia in this thing. So I think, in the long run, that is really the important part that's going to appear, is this challenge to the this whole Bretton Woods financial system. And with that, I'll pass it back. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Raj, if you want to comment at any particular time.
Briefly, I think the internet, first of all, I disagree that capital was not international in Lenin's time. It already was. That's what Lenin's essays and writings are about. Imperialism, the head stage, he goes over that. So it's enlargement from that time, but in terms of qualitative change, I don't think so. And power is exercised via national state. National state has not disappeared. So the concept you're saying, Belt and Road is basically Chinese economy spreading, just like the US economy spread, the British economy spread because they were the great capitalist powers and they had the greatest workshop of the world, Britain first, the United States after the Second World War, now China today. So that is basically they're trying to build their empire through Belt and Road, whereas United States is global and United States is very powerful. So that's they're trying to do it without getting into direct confrontation with the United States. That's my comment.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Mehmet.
Thank you. Good presentation, Raj. I'd like to approach this whole issue from a different perspective, if I may. We have been talking very from the philosophical, let's say, voluntarist side of history and events. I'm hearing from everybody that, hey, Russia did this, Russia did that, Ukraine did this, but we are not talking, and we have heard so much about how megalomaniac Putin is and his dreams about getting to the warm seas and reestablishing the Russian Empire and so on and so forth. But looking at the events, it is obvious, and it was obvious, that Russia was in a very weak position. And actually, this last move towards Ukraine showed that it was weak. It showed its weakness. And why am I saying this is that it was, I believe, kind of pushed into this move, just like how Saddam Hussein was pushed to invade Qatar. So my question to everybody when we're talking about this is that if you were in Putin's shoes, what would you have done? You are being pushed to the corner. You're going to lose whether you resist or not. They are going to take away everything one by one, piece by piece, here and there, with military bases here and there, and sanctions. Remember, we had sanctions before the Ukraine invasion. So are you going to just lay down and take it, or are you going to go to a war? So let's not be very voluntarist in our approach, as if like this was in the will of Russia. But at some point, Putin had to say, hey, stop this. Just like Saddam Hussein, who did not want war, who was in a very weak position. He knew that if he went into war, he would be destroyed. But he went to war anyway because he was promised by the United States. And he was right going to war with Qatar because Qatar was stealing his oil. So now with the world coming upon Russia, especially the NATO and everything, what should have Putin done? If not this, I would call it a resistance. I am not giving up on the class, approach to this. Of course, we are not going to take sides in capitalist versus capitalist wars, and we are going to push for the working classes to gain power and to seize all wars, whatever, all wars. But until then, we have to recognize that this is not Putin going megalomaniac, but he was pushed to a corner and he had no other choice. If I was in his shoes, I'm sorry, but I would have done the same thing because I can't see any other thing. I think somebody mentioned starting with that this is a trap, and this was a trap. And because Putin was, or the Russia was in a weak position, that they had to step into the trap. So anyway, I'd like Raj to comment on that. Thanks so much.
Well, I see it in terms of the dogfight over Ukraine by two sets of capitalists. In this case, primarily Russian. Now, Chinese have investment in Ukraine, by the way. So India has trade with Ukraine. I don't know if they have investment in Ukraine or not, but they buy Antonov aircraft, which factory they have bombed. But the point is, it's when you start saying Russia had no choice, well, within the capitalist system, that's what happens. Dogfights take place, and one capitalist country would try to domineer everybody else. And that's United States trying to do it. But if let's say, so Russia was a socialist state, it'll handle the matter differently. Because right now, who's going to get hurt by this war? The working people of the world, right? So a communist regime would handle it differently than what Putin has done. He has momentary advantage with hypersonic weapons and proximity to Ukraine, and he's exercising that to say, you can't come in here. But it is not for the defense of Ukrainian or Russian people. It is for the Ukrainian Russian capitalist class. And American capitalists dogfight over the miseries for working people, both in Russia, United States, and Ukraine. Chinese people are not hurt by it because, India has stayed away. India has refused to denounce this invasion. The Japanese prime minister went there and he put it pointedly at the press conference, trying to get Modi, push Modi to denounce. Modi refused to do it. And because Indian capitalist class, whom Modi represents, has interest, and they buy weapons and they'll sell things to Russia, long-standing kind of a understanding of support, mutual support. So they're not going to betray Russia. But it's a capitalist class that is fighting here. China is going to come out the beneficiary for all this, actually.
If you were in Putin's shoes, knowing that he's not socialist, he's not communist, he's not this and that, if you were in Putin's shoes and you were surrounded and being attacked like that all the time, what would you have done, Raj?
I don't know. I don't know what I would do, but as you see, the result of this is not going to be good for the people, the ordinary people of Russia, United States, or Ukraine, particularly Ukraine. Look at all the suffering that is happening, people, millions driven out and all that. How could this be for the people? So when you say, what would you in Putin's shoes? I wouldn't be in Putin's shoes by choice, because I don't want to be running an oligarchic system and represent, or for that matter, United States president, because I won't have a choice to be a socialist president of the United States. So first of all, nobody's offering me the choice. It's not going to happen. So it's kind of a question where I can't answer it other than to say, look at it, this is what, yes, United States is definitely pushing against Russia, right? They're bringing missiles and things closer and closer, and Putin said, no, I'm not going to let you do it, Ukraine. But, they have added so many countries already. So I can understand that. But I can't justify this attack on the basis that it is good for the people of Ukraine or Russia. I can understand. I can understand that Russia, being a weaker power, is doing it, but Russia could only do it because it has a backing of China. Couldn't have done it without it.
I'm going to make some comments now, and then followed by Sharon and then Eugene. I think it was interesting that Trajan pointed to the creeping Nazification of the Ukraine. And I think people have tended to dismiss the denazification aspect of the Russian incursion. I think it's a very serious business, and I think it's true to say that this is an anti-fascist, anti-Nazi war. And of course, this war is also directed at the creeping fascization and Nazification of the whole of the United States and the EU. This is happening. The capitalist, the imperialist classes, and it's accelerating. It's sort of, the mask has been torn off, in a sense, at least partially, from the United States, especially, but also in Germany, in Britain, and France. There's this mask of sort of civilization and democracy and so on is falling away, and we're seeing the real character of these regimes. And of course, the working class in Russia will suffer setbacks, and the Ukrainian working class, just as they did during World War II, they suffered setbacks by fighting the Nazis. But in the end, it was justified. It was unavoidable. Of course, the working class always pays the price for fascism and imperialism. But to defend against them is important. Okay, I'll leave it there. So the next speaker is Sharon.
Actually, just if I may, very brief comment on that. Yes, I agree with you, but I think to say is just for that reason, it is not. And it's very difficult to say that you'll be able to eliminate the Nazis there, although if they do it well and good, I think that would be good. By the way, that is the distinction between Ukraine and Russia. In Ukraine, Nazis are basically a muscle of behind Zelensky. In Russia, the second largest communist party, second largest party is the Communist Party, is an ally, essentially. Well, they oppose it, but they are tolerated. And so that is an important distinction. The Russia and Ukraine are not the same kind of countries. So that distinction I made, and that what you're saying is there's a validity, but I don't know if this is being, CPRF, basically Communist Party of Russia, is saying what you're saying, okay? I didn't read all of it, but they are saying something very strongly what you just said. Okay. That's it, yeah.
Okay, next is Sharon and followed by Jean.
Thank you, Mehmet. Can you let me unmute my video?
Apparently not, it's not possible.
Yeah, if I do it, then everybody is going to,
right.
It's not on individual basis.
Okay. So I wanted to just say that I think Raj's approach to asking the question, does military conflict serve the interests of the international working class, is the right question, and that we should look at it through that lens. So we all know that Marx argued that the American Civil War was a just war and that the working class needed to support it and give their lives, which they did. And we know that Marx's argument about that. And I think the last just war was the Second World War, where from the point of view of the international working class, fascism had to be stopped, and the Japanese Empire had to be stopped. And it served ultimately the interest of our class, even though it was an enormous sacrifice and not primarily Americans, but Soviet citizens who sacrificed. So I think in taking that point of view, that lens, I think that this war is not justified. And, the question of what should Putin have done? There's always choice. There's always choice. And he rose to the bait that was put out by the West, by the United States in particular. He rose to that bait to the great detriment of the working class in Russia, as well as the international working class. And I think we should, as Marxists, always keep that lens when we're talking about armed conflict. The other thing I wanted to say is that I agree with Richard W. that the question of defeating the Bretton Woods regime is becoming more and more to the forefront. And it's not like that's never been tried before, but it's, I think, reached a new stage, and we need to understand it more. We need to understand what the Chinese are trying to do, and look at that struggle as one of the key elements of conflict, international conflict going forward. The U.S. is not in a good position, and that means that you can never predict what the U.S. is going to do in that situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to ask Sharon, explain what do you mean by Bretton Woods? Did you mean the American dollar as the reference currency underpinning the economy of the world, or did you mean other things? You can explain that a little bit, because Richard also said it. So maybe you can explain or Richard can explain. It will be good for everybody to, because two people made that point.
Go ahead, either way, either one of them. I guess Richard may want to answer that, Mehmet.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That the dominance of the U.S. dollar, which began after the Second World War, and the U.S. dollar as the international currency. For a while, we thought that the Iran and Iraq and other oil producing states were going to be earning petro-euros instead of petro-dollars, but that didn't happen. But now there's a whole new effort to change the basis of international exchange. But Richard might want to say more about that.
Well, I'm gonna recognize Gene because he had his hand up, and then maybe we'll go back to Richard or Mehmet. Could you take your hand down unless you want to speak again? Go ahead,
Okay,
Gene.
am I on?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I have to apologize. I've been without hot water for a week, and the workers decided that this was the time that they were going to complete the work and finish it. So I'll have hot water tonight and be happy. But, and so I feel the weight of the dictatorship of the workers at this point, and I'm sympathetic to that. That being said, I really appreciate the discussion and what everybody has said. And I know Raj would not be happy if I agreed with him. So I'll voice my some of my criticisms, and in brief, basically, I think he is misapplying Lenin in this point. And without going into it in great detail, just let me point out certain things that has happened since Lenin died that need to be taken into account. One of which is, of course, the Second Russian Revolution, Stalin, World War II, the fact that the defeat of fascism, which is very relevant to the current discussion, I think, on Ukraine. And in addition, there is the transformation of imperialism after World War II with the domination of the US, which is a new phenomenon, which wasn't present in Lenin's day, and also atomic weapons. This was something was never conceived of by Lenin. So there are a whole series of things that are very relevant to the current discussion, which Lenin did not discuss. So Stalin says someplace that there is a dogmatic Marxism and a creative Marxism, and of course he opted for the latter. And I think we need to be more creative. We're not to abandon Leninism in this regard, but to apply it more creatively, particularly with regard to all the transformations which have occurred since that time and are very much at play. And basically, I tend to agree with Sharon and Richard F. on this, that, not just what do you expect Putin to do, but he's doing the right thing under these consequences, under these conditions. And we'll discuss this more, but I'll just stop there.
I just want to comment very, very briefly to make Jean happy. And that is that, Jean, you'll be very happy to know that I follow Xi Jinping in one respect completely, which is that he read Marx's 3 volumes 3 times. That was said on the 100th anniversary of the party celebration, that Xi Jinping has read 3 volumes of Capital 3 times. I'm on the 3rd reading of Capital. So you see, I'm a follower of Xi Jinping, at least in that one aspect.
Okay. Well, that's,
thank you.
that's
The next speaker.
Thank you.
Next one is Alan, followed by Amit, then Richard W. Go.
Hi, Raj. Thanks for stepping up and doing the presentation today. A couple of quick comments. I think that if we're going to talk about Lenin's imperialism, there's another aspect of it, which is that during times of extreme aggressiveness on the part of imperialism, sections of the left tend to line up with their own imperialist government. And in this case, I think what we see in the US is the overwhelming majority of the left has lined up, in a sense, behind the US. They condemn NATO, but it's basically sort of a qualified condemnation. The first thing is that this idea that somehow what Putin is up to is an immediate kind of resource grab for the Ukraine. I mean, the Ukraine, the largest export in the Ukraine are seed oils. And this idea that the Russians it's a resource grab or it's a land grab, when in fact, what's happened to the Russian economy in response to, by the imperialists to their intervention in Ukraine is something like almost 10% decline in their GDP. This is more than 10 times the annual exports of Ukraine. It would seem to me to be a totally erroneous idea. And it basically lines up with the imperialist narrative that, well, Putin is out to grab, the resources of the Ukraine. Really, this is about long-term, Putin is a nationalist. And that's something that's unacceptable to the United States. And if the idea is that if he's a capitalist nationalist, and therefore we can't say anything about the fact that they're putting nuclear weapons in Western Ukraine, that they're attacking the working people in the Eastern Ukraine, that they're aligning with the fascists in order to launch this attack against Russia, and that the Russians cannot defend themselves, then to me, we've totally lost the context of the situation. And in particular, what we're really doing is, like a large part of the left, both the social democratic left and the Trotskyist left, is to reduce this thing to the same terms that the imperialists are saying, that it's just a contention between 2 rival imperialisms. It's a self-defense. They tried for 8 years to negotiate a peace. They tried for 8 years to stop the attacks. And I think that we need to step forward and say, look, this is what's going on. The last thing is, what's going to be the impact of this? Let's say Russia loses. Let's say that Russia collapses. What's going to be the impact on Iran, on Venezuela, on Cuba, and other countries in Latin America, around the world? If this is just a resource grab, then, well, it's just one imperialist power losing to the other. In fact, this is actually the forefront of the struggle against the imperialist front, sanctions, control of the financial system, and ultimately it's going to weaken imperialism. So I have a different perspective on this.
Okay. All right.
I want to respond very briefly.
Yeah.
I think this saying that lining behind the imperialist camp, anybody who doesn't agree with this position of supporting Russia as against the United States as a kind of defensive thing is actually sectarian thing. The Marxists should not become sectarians. I think the thing is that may be your position, Alan, but the thing is, I would ask you a reverse question. What is this war doing to the working classes of the world? Okay, so that also is it's a negative, right? So the idea of branding one position as a defense of imperialism is sectarianism, in my opinion. That's it.
Okay, the next speaker is Amit Singh. Go ahead, Amit.
All right. So the discussion, I like the discussion in the sense that it has helped me process my own thinking. But Raj, I think to characterize Russia and China equally imperialist, I would have some problem with that. The thing is that both China and Russia, China is more capitalist than Russia in that sense. However, and China is more economically advanced. However, if you look at Chinese control of the world resources in comparison to the control of the world resources, world financial system especially, and you can see right now how much clout the US has in terms of the overall control over the financial resources. So, there is absolutely no comparison. If you compare US and China in terms of control over financial institutions, China is absolutely like, African country. That's absolutely no control. So I have some problems when you put in terms of inter-imperialist war, because I think China is becoming imperialist in some sense. However, I would not say that it has reached to the same stage as US has turned into, and the other client, I would say all these European Union states are almost the client states of the US, especially UK, etc. So, combined together, the kind of, this liberal democratic imperialist states, their clout is much, much larger than what China and Russia have. So looking from that particular lens, to me, it looks like that Russia is probably looking at a future event when they're probably sensing that they will meet the same fate as Yugoslavia did. When almost it was complete disintegration of Serbia. So there are lots of different states formed after the disintegration of Yugoslavia. So probably if Russia is not going to put some counter effort, I don't know how much they will be successful, because I have serious doubts. So whether they are involved in a war or they are not, I have very serious doubts whether Russia would indeed counter. So in that sense, I disagree with Alan that it will lead to weakening of the US, because I think US is much, much more powerful. We don't understand how powerful the US is. Okay, so, and even after so much decline, I would still say US is still very, very powerful. So, I don't think that, Russia, I don't know actually that whether Russia will really become victorious after the war, or even if Russia wouldn't have gone into the war, what would have happened? I don't actually know. Because I have absolutely no idea. However, I would definitely say that this particular attempt by the left to moralize the things that, we have to be always anti-war, we have to be always, so this is like some sort of a tokenism, useless tokenism, I would say, an empty moralism. The thing is that we are on the verge of almost nuclear war. We don't know what will happen. So if Russian imperialist if Russia is characterized as an imperialist country, I mean, what it would end up is that we don't have any reference point to look at the war in terms of very future events. So, for example, I mean, what will happen after 20 years? Alan is talking about if Russia is defeated in the war, what will happen to the countries like Cuba, Iran, etc. But even to the Russia itself, it can disintegrate. So, what are your comments about that?
Yeah. So first of all, if you listen to my talk, you would have noticed that I did not call Russia as an imperialist stage of capitalism. It's capitalist country, but not imperialist, because that's why I went through Lenin's definition, whereas China is. But I think the most rotten stage, even in imperialism, the most rotten stage is America. Okay, this is the most rotten. And that's what they've gone to the point of supporting fascists, not only in Ukraine, elsewhere also, they're supporting fascist elements. And so, whereas Russia, if you look at the regime, it is a strange mixture, okay? But the Russian people, from their experience of First and Second World War, are going to be behind Putin in this war. And if Russia is destroyed, it would not be because the United States can go in there and kill Putin. If they kill Putin, there will be another Putin equally powerful arise, because the Russian people will not give in, okay? So that I think is, nobody needs to worry. Russia cannot, in my opinion, cannot be defeated because of 20th century, no matter what the regime is. It's not going to be quartered or anything. Putin has that fear. I agree with that fear is justified. The United States is trying to do it, but the US is a declining power now. Even it's the strongest, but declining. And we look at the condition it is in, it's in no position to go to war. It cannot, I mean, they cannot fight in Europe against Russia. And they're vassals over there, they talk about it, but I don't think they can fight. Russia today cannot be defeated. But the question is whether this going into Ukraine to wipe out the Nazis, will it succeed? Danger is greater to Russia on the economic front, because they could become isolated. So I think this tactic is, I can't answer what he should have done. And the provocation is from the United States, okay? There's no question. They've been doing it, pushing it. So, but if Russia couldn't have gone into it without backing of China. So now with China and Russia combined, it becomes a powerful counterweight. I'm not saying that is a bad thing. I'm just saying that don't consider it socialism versus capitalism. These are two capitalist camps fighting. And Ukraine is both for a strategic reason, because otherwise the area of enlargement of Western capital and bordering and guns placed in Russia's head, that's a very important factor. But also it's Ukraine's potential. If Ukraine was actually become a part of Russia or become associated with Russia, there were 185 million population, and resource will be much richer. That's why Soviet Union was strong. Ukraine was part of it. Ukraine going separate, and this is really Yeltsin's undermining the whole Soviet Union by pulling Russia out, is the reason. So Putin is right. The destruction of USSR was the worst thing that happened to the world. But he himself is not building, a state that is different. It is oligarchic and bureaucratic state. So it's capitalist state. I'm not putting them on equal footing. So that's my clarification.
Okay, let's not keep repeating.
Yeah,
okay.
Just 1 minute, Richard. First of all, I have opened the chat now. It's like about 12:10, so 12:15. So chat is open for everybody now. And by the way, Rich Johnson's hand is up on the phone.
Okay, the next speaker is 2841 on the phone. Go ahead, please.
Hi, this is Kit again. I'm sorry my Zoom doesn't work with the audio part. Anyway, I have a couple of questions for Raj. And thank you, Raj. It's been very interesting also to listen to your presentation today. I was wondering, do you watch or read Times of India? The reason I'm asking is because around the time of the conflict began, either it was the end of February or the first part of early March, there was a video interview by Times of India. There was a general whose name I didn't write down, who had worked with the Russian army, and he was being interviewed. He came to the conclusion that Putin's goal is to destroy the main infrastructures of Ukraine so that NATO won't want to take over Ukraine after Russia's done with it. He also did say that Americans and NATO don't want to get involved on a conflict on the land because their military are not prepared. The U.S. is particularly impacted by COVID, so this would impact their ability to even fight on the ground, but also U.S. People, most U.S. People don't want to fight. So anyway, that's one question. The other question has to do with the ruble. Do you know if the ruble is backed by gold or by oil? And then what I had heard recently too is that the very rich Russians are buying gold and jewelry to replace their wealth in properties and bank accounts. So what are your comments about that? Thank you.
I can answer the first one. The second, I really have to say I don't know. The first one, I have watched that general. I think we're talking about the same person. So that's also by not only his, but John Mearsheimer's thesis. I mean, he's been talking about it since 2015, that there's no way. And many people, George Kennan said that this, who was the architect containment of USSR, said this will be madness to try and take Ukraine away from Russia. So many other high military ranking, other people have said in that, said this is absolutely crazy, but that's what is happening, neocons. And I mean, that's basically the direction of American imperialism, that it just goes on to this thing because it is decaying, okay? It cannot provide for its people, it's oligarchic. So it is the worst one. I mean, Russia is still an industrial country, although many people say it's just a economy with military and oil pump. But you couldn't have this modern military without industrial side to it. So I can't answer the second question but Russia ruble is weaker than rupee, which is a weak currency. In fact, rupee to dollar is about 75 rupees to a dollar. Ruble is, before the latest crash, was over 100. Now it's probably 140 or something like it. And they're going to do the trade in, they're going to sell 3 million metric tons of oil to India, which they were doing very little of because it's just too far and all that. Now they're going to sell it on concession, which I mentioned. So it'll be based on rupee, by the way. And then the Russians will buy it. So they've done that trade before. I can't answer your second question, but that thesis of the Indian general and Mearsheimer, who's an intellectual writer, is the same.
Okay, thank you. We've gone through the first round and we're going to start the second round. But there's still plenty of time for people who haven't asked questions or made comments to volunteer, and I'll put them at the front of the line. The next speaker is Richard W., followed by Norma J.F. Harrison. Richard, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Yusuf has not spoken and he wants to speak.
Oh, I just saw his name. Yes, go ahead, Yusuf.
Thank you. Yeah, I was away for a while, but also it should be remembered that after the coup, the 2014 coup, Maidan coup, the Communist Party in Ukraine was outlawed, and now actually two siblings of the two brothers of the Ukrainian Young Communist League, actually they're faced with treason and execution. But in the Russian occupied portions, actually, the Ukrainian Communist Party was able to make a demonstration for the first time recently. So I wanted to add those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. Okay, go, Richard W. No, I guess not. Okay, go ahead. Do you want to speak, Richard? You had your hand up. You have to unmute yourself. Maybe he's not allowed to, Mehmet.
There we go. Okay. I wasn't able to unmute for a bit there, which is probably a lot of people are probably happy about. Couple of things. I wanted to congratulate Gene on getting hot water. A couple of things. Another thing that was briefly glossed over, and I think is going to play a very big role, is that the topic of nuclear weapons is brought up. I think I heard that this morning or last night that the Russians fired off a hypersonic weapon. And the speculation is that one, it was a demonstration in the United States, and two, that they wanted to test their system. And that represents a whole new level tie that, anyways, that represents a whole new level in things. People haven't really come around to that yet. Raj kind of undercut one of the points I was gonna bring up, which is that we talk about imperialism, and most people think about it, I think, in terms of geographic territory, and by that definition, it's hard to accuse Russia of being imperialist, because in fact they've given up territory over the last 20, 30 years. Secondly, it's hard to and the same thing is true actually of China. I don't think that they've really I don't think they've given up any geography. In fact they still lay claim to Taiwan, which anyways. But the other thing is financially, you can't really claim that Russia is an imperial country or state. Financially, they really are not a big player. China is more of a player on the world scene than that. And in large measure, what they're doing is they're taking US dollars and recycling it in terms of developing productive enterprises in a lot of countries. So that raises that. One of the, before I get to the other issue here, is that I think Sharon brought up, or Mehmet, one of the two, brought up about Russia rising to the bait. And I'm in agreement with, while I was agreeing with Mehmet, I'm not sure I agree with Sharon on this. I mean, if you ask the question of, well, how, of how does a war in Ukraine help the working class, then you also have to ask the other question, which is, well, how does United States or NATO imperialism trying to subvert Ukraine, how does that help the working class and anywhere? And I think that Putin, I mean, he gave, to my understanding, he gave a warning of what was going to come down 3 to 4 months in advance. And in fact, part of the reason why, as my understanding, part of the reason why his advance in Ukraine is so slow is because he is repeatedly trying to offer the Ukrainian government and implicitly that implies the United States in particular, but NATO, a way out of the situation. So you have to ask yourself, well, do we here you have it's a dogfight, and it's not pretty. And I think that where do you draw the red line in the case of Russia? I mean, does they have to advance up to the Russians' border within 5 miles? So I think there's now there was a question raised about Bretton Woods and the significance of that. One is that there was just a subcommittee hearing in Congress, in which it was with dismay that the United States passed a law, basically sort of like a Build Back Better, but for Central Latin America. They're all rejecting the aid packages from the United States. They're accepting aid packages from China. They're accepting, in Russia's cases, they're accepting military negotiations where in Nicaragua and Cuba, Venezuela. And so there's a rightful concern that, that they're knocking on our door. That here you're witnessing a challenge to the Monroe Doctrine. So getting back to the Bretton Woods thing, so what that implies is that if they're all accepting Chinese aid, or accepting Russian aid, and if this development of a second financial system goes through, you're starting to see the world split in terms of the ability to do financial transactions. In this regard, I happen to think that I am in favor of a unified financial system. I think that this is going to cause a lot of problems, for any international travel, not to mention any international capital flows and that kind of stuff. The second where it's really going to rear its head is that to date, the United States has been getting off very free by virtue of the fact that we have a reserve currency. So, there's actually, they said there's more dollars out there as petrodollars than there are in this country. And what that's going to do is that's going to cause, aside from the immediate effects of this war, which are, inflation, in all manners of agricultural products, mineral products, etc. In the long run, it's going to cause, problems with people's credit cards. People have been living off their credit in this country. People have been living off their credit cards for roughly my generation. So I hope I've answered.
That's about four.
I'll shut up.
Okay, the next speaker is Norma. Please unmute yourself. Mehmet, please unmute Norma, please. Or Alan.
Yeah, Norma.
Okay,
there you go.
okay. So now I have to go back to my page on which I've written my notes to be able to tell you everything. I hope I'm half as interesting to you as Richard Wright was. Let's see, Chinese lending does not at this point require nations to give up their social services. I don't know, I can't pull up when the United States started telling nations that had borrowed from it that they had to give up their social services. The World Bank, IMF loans that were being made, you know about that, right? That was control of governments throughout the world that had, for one thing, been bombed by the United States during World War II. United States participated, well, I should say United States leadership, ownership, the owners participated in encouraging Hitler to march. And one of the benefits was that there needed to be a Marshall Plan at the end of World War II to rebuild France and England that had been bombed so badly, which was wonderfully profitable to the people who had investments in those lending behaviors that we kind of forget about. And the idea that China could be doing what it says it's doing, which is supporting comfort in other nations through its low lending fees and not telling the nations to give up their social services in turn for getting these loans. The other is the humiliation that Russia has been made to suffer. I don't say that somebody should go to war over it, but it's tough to tolerate. And it has been huge. Russia has been backing up for 100+ years. It has been being invaded for 100+ years against its Bolshevik revolution and pulling back constantly from what it has been able to do, what it has been wanting to do. The other thing is to mention that the A-bomb, you remember the A-bomb, it got dropped on the United States in 1945 before it bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It got dropped on Alamogordo as a test. It surprised the people who made it and did it at its strength. That's a phenomenal idea. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's a lot of devastation. And of course, you know that it has been bombing in the United States or anywhere that they feel like it for the last, well, how many ever years that is, 50, 70 years, calling them tests, right? When I was talking about the reparations deal after World War II and the strengthening thereby of the US place in the world and of the US dollar, that's the result of the owners paying for the gases that went to kill, to slaughter Jews in the various countries that were killing them, and so on. The benefits to those.
Okay. Oh,
Got it.
okay.
I just want to respond very quickly
our...
to Norma. I just want to, I think she wants to defend China, which is fine. You can defend China, but I want to ask you, when the 5 Chinese banks have so much money, they are the biggest in the world, where do you think that money comes from?
Are these private banks, Raj? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Raj. You're muted.
No. I think one or two of them may be private, but I think they are government owned. Okay, government controls it. But I'm saying when they invest money in other countries, if they didn't make money, the banks will not grow bigger. And in Chinese, for example, take over ports.
I'm sorry, Raj. We've lost you.
You're cutting off, Raj.
Chinese capital operates slightly differently because US capital, but it does not mean it is fundamentally different.
Okay. Thank you.
You asked me where I think it comes from. The question is, where does it go? What's it being spent on? And what is the effect of Xi's attempt to regulate and cut back on the ability? First of all, you know that the billionaires don't run the government.
Listen, we have to bring this session to an end. There'll be an informal session afterwards, but the recorded session that's going to be posted on YouTube, we're drawing that to a conclusion now. So thank you, everybody. Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Niebuhr Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Niebuhr Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.